welcome back and thank you for joining us for our first episode of PeaceTalks. Hello and welcome to Peacekeeper Game's first podcast slash video cast, I'm not sure what you call it, and we're going to be discussing the negative play experiences in games, and specifically in Ice and Fire. And with me today is Brett Lanpher. Hello.
Hey, what's up?
What's happening? And a quick introduction from Brett.
So I jumped into this game, basically, it was right before Adepticon last year, so I didn't quite make the Adepticon trip, but I jumped into it with my gaming community in Indianapolis, and I did a demo game where my club mate and good friend John Hurley set me up with Lannisters against his Starks, and it was pretty much a snowball effect from there. I liked the Lannister style of play, a little bit of defense mixed with some kind of low-key aggression from them. So I just kind of went from there and started building my own lists. And then I went to Gen Con that same year, and I was able to win that tournament with a Tyrion list. And since then, I've kind of shelved Tyrion, actually, ironically, for the exact reason we're here discussing.
That's right.
He was creating a negative play experience within my gaming group, but not just within my gaming group. There was starting to be a lot of grumbling around what I call the big page, which is the Song of Ice and Fire Miniatures Games Facebook page ran by Simon Swan.
Right.
And so a lot of those guys on there were complaining about Tyrion and how oppressive he is and how oppressive Varys is. So I just went ahead and put him on the shelf. He's sitting on his Iron Throne from Gen Con, just kind of hanging out. And I picked up Night's Watch, who has no control aspect. So I've been having a lot more fun with them, and it's a little bit more challenging. So.
All right. Wonderful. And John Davis from Southern California. John, welcome.
How you doing? It's good to be here. And a real quick background is I've played miniature war games since I was a teenager, 40K, fantasy. I got very heavily competitive into X-Wing, and now this was actually my very first Kickstarter ever. And I went in pretty heavy and not looked back since.
All right. And you've been playing since the beginning, so Kickstarters. And what's your faction? I think I've seen some beautiful free folk. If that's
yeah, I love free folk, and if I could, I would say that would be my favorite. But I play them all. So
gotcha. All right. So we are established. I will be acting as a sort of moderator, just asking questions while Brett and John discuss the topics I give. So first off, what is the definition of a negative play experience? Let's start with Brett.
So, in my opinion, I think what's creating a negative play experience in this game, and I'll start by saying that they have addressed the biggest culprit for that, which was Lord Varys. So, I think a negative play experience is going to come when a person kind of has a plan and it's worked for them, and they get some cards or they get some combos that they want to play, or they see the potential to kind of take over the unit with a key tactics board play, and then you essentially take that away from them. So the permission style of play is, I think, most often going to be the culprit for what's creating a negative play experience, whereas they had something set up and they put whatever resources they had to into building that combination, and then with a roll of a dice, it's just simply denied to them. And in my experience, Varys was by far the biggest cause of some of that frustration, especially around Indianapolis, when they would kind of hang their guy out to dry, banking on a free attack, finishing the unit that they were going after, and then Varys just says no, and now their flank is exposed, and they end up losing the game as a result. It can be very frustrating. So there's a few other elements that go into it, but I think the control style is going to be the most oppressive, and that's what tends to kind of leave guys with a bad taste.
All right, so coming from Brett and his experience with Tyrion, etc., and Varys, denying the opponent the ability to do things is his definition. John, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, that's right on the money there. That basically, you've set up, you're excited, you've got all these cool little toys that you want to play with, and you just get denied. And I mean, there's, part of that's a war game experience. You're trying to counterplay the other player. But it seems to be when it's over oppressive, when you can never, when the player has a counter to everything. I mean, that's good play tactics, but also how fun is that for the other player?
Right.
And how fun is that for the other player when he's constantly just getting counterspelled or counterplotted or whatnot?
Okay, and I'm going to put forth something that, in my mind, will add to this discussion, which is the inability to stop something. That creates, in my mind, a worse NPE for players that come from things like Magic the Gathering, where they're used to blue decks that do things like counter, but when you just can't stop something, period, that is, in my mind, creates a very NPE as well. So just putting that out there in the feelers.
I've got the Board Game Geek definition of NPE.
Oh, go for it.
It's when playing a game frustrates or bores one or both players. NPEs are thought to prevent new players from fully entering the game and leading to existing players abandoning the game.
So bores? Okay, yeah. I don't think boring is going to be our topic today because this game is super fun.
But frustrates. Yeah.
But frustrating, yes. And so I think both sides of the coin were denying your opponent things and also the inability to do anything about something is also, in my mind, in my experience. So the Lannisters I played at first, and then the Night's Watch, and both of those factions I bailed on because the first one was nonstop counters, the second one was nonstop card draw, and I got an answer to everything. And it was just NPEs all day, so I went to Boltons, and that did not help my case whatsoever, because I was a big fan of Bruce. I guess that's just my play style, but I'm gonna step out of the discussion. But I'm really interested in this topic because I keep seeing it, right? So anyways, now that we have established a definition thanks to Board Game Geek and our own experiences, let's move on to specifics in this game, A Song of Ice and Fire TMG. How does this game input negative play experiences? What do you guys think? Start with Brett.
So obviously the aforementioned Varus was he still can be pretty oppressive. I don't want to speak about him in past tense, like Varus is just gone from this game and he's been totally reworked. He can still block predictable maneuvers, and he can still do it pretty reliably. So the plays like round one, turn one, whoever has first player, I think almost always, unless they need the free maneuver to get to an objective token and establish their presence there, they're going to go to the tactic zone, pull 2 cards, and dish out a token. Token being less effective because the money bag is obviously open, but it's the 2 card draws. So those types of plays are pretty predictable. I think it'd be very rare for someone to go straight to the actual playing field and activate a combat unit. They're generally round one, first one is going to do something on the board. So Varus can block that play, obviously. And then if a charge or a combat is established towards the end of a player's round, and then that person who charged or is in a combat situation, they're generally going to go for the combat zone if they go first next. So that's also a very predictable move that Varus can block. But outside of Varus, you now have Walder Frey, who can claim a zone on the tactics board. If you're first player, he can claim any zone, influence a unit, cause a wound, and shut off their units' abilities and attachments. And with Varus being less common, and only Lannisters currently having Intrigue and Subterfuge, there's very little counterplay to Walder Frey. Outside of when he's not the first player, you can take the Crown Zone from him, which for most houses is going to be less than an optimal play to go plop down on the Crown just to stop Walder Frey. So I'm seeing a little bit of grumbling about Walder Frey being pretty oppressive with very little to counter him right now. The Baratheons are getting the NCU, who her influence is to shut off an NCU's abilities, so she's a pretty hard counter to Walder Frey, as is Ygritte in the Free Folk army. But there are some some factions just can't really answer to Walder Frey very well. So, aside from Walder Frey, you've got Tywin Lannister. He's only once per game, but his ability to trigger at any moment, the start of any turn, player's turn or opponent's turn, he's able to plop all 3 tokens on them and strip the unit and the attachment of abilities. And then you've got a few cards, Roose Bolton, some Freehold cards that can do the same thing. Alistair Thorne and Night's Watch. So those are the biggest culprits for that type of control right now, are those cards and NCUs that are shutting units and their attachments completely off, effectively crippling a powerful combat unit.
John, thoughts?
Brett's 100% right. I mean, those are probably the biggest culprits in competitive play that I've seen in our meta here on the West Coast.
So if you put, let's say, a Tyrion list together with a Walder and a Tywin and who else? And a Varys, you know.
Yeah, if you want to spend the 14 points, it'd be pretty darn impressive, honestly.
And then a bunch of poor fellows, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, that you just can't kill. So
there's a lot of ways you can do it. 26 points on the field doesn't seem like that much, but I have not had the pleasure of playing Benjamin Lynn from Blitz Minis, but one of our Lannister players did pick up his Gregor list that has Walder Frey, Cersei, and Tyrion, the NCU, and still with 27 points on the battlefield with Gregor, that is still a very tough list to overcome just because of the power of those 3 NCUs. So.
Alrighty. So, and then on the other coin, on the other side of the coin, we have the not being able to stop anything. Anything comes to mind, John, that when you see on the field, you're just like, oh, great. There's nothing you can do about that.
Well, I'll be honest right now, Flatemen. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but like you look across the board and you're like, Flatemen, they're just there, and you're like, crap. Every list is now running it, and there's nothing you can do. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna have to deal with them, and they're gonna be consistent output of 8 dice, with full ranks and 3+ save. Same thing with like Brett said, Walder's out there, and he's gonna do his thing, and he does feel less oppressive than Varys did, because you know that you do have an opportunity to counter him, but he's still out there, and like you said, you're gonna have a less optimal turn if you're trying to counter him. So it's just one of the things where it's like you have all these cool abilities, but you're more worried about them being turned off than how they actually play the game.
That's the juice of what we're getting at. That's what I was going to lead into. Is I was going to bring up the Stone Thrower, and I was going to bring up the teaser we got from Melisandre. These types of things you just can't stop. It's gonna crush you when it happens. But these two sides of the coin that I've presented it this way because they counter each other, right? So you have these things that you just can't stop. You need to bring the things that stop things, so that they kind of work harmoniously. But the juice of what we're getting at is when you bring a list to the table and you just can't do things. That's what the NPE is what we're talking about. Looking at this coin and both sides, the result is that some things become necessary, which establishes the meta of the game. And so let's talk about what you guys think you must bring just in case. John, go ahead.
Right now, Walder is a must, or not a must, but it's pretty strong. If you want to be competitive, you need to bring 7 to 8 activations, and you need to bring something that's gonna either take on Walder or counter him. Is what I'm seeing in our area.
Brett?
Yeah, so I think Walder, while a lot of people hate him, I think the reason he almost becomes a necessary evil, and I guess this is where I'm playing the devil's advocate, is you have some seriously potent, just absolutely disgusting combinations available. And a lot of that is due to the neutrals being available to everybody. So I'm going to pick on my guy Dario Naharis for a second. You plop Dario in a unit that innately has critical blows. So I'm going to say Sworn Brothers from Night's Watch, Sworn Swords from Starks, and Mountains Men in the Lannister army. You pop his attachment in there, and then it becomes a kind of a game within a game. How many sixes am I going to roll?
Right.
If I don't roll enough sixes, I'm mad because I've got this 8-point unit that's glass cannony, and they didn't take advantage of precision. Whereas if I roll 3, 4, 5 sixes, I'm almost effectively one-shotting that unit. And the risk of the dice in general favoring that many sixes and blowing your best unit apart, I think that is why Walder is going to be relatively common, is some of the potent combinations that you can build within your list that can kind of take over the game. So while he does exist and his existence is a little bit frustrating, I think there has to be a hard counter to shut down some of those really, really potent units. Great Axes with Brain and Hodor coming into mind as well. Great Axe's role has shifted from wanting to smack you with Mighty Cleave and do as many wounds as they can and either force you to retreat so they don't hit you with the no armor saves attack. But then if you retreat, they can smack you again with Mighty Cleave later. So now they really want you to charge them. And Brain and Hodor in particular are going to be able to disorder that charge and pretty well make sure that they live through it, and then they're going to smack you with 8 or 6 attack dice that hit on 2s with no saves. And so Walder or Tywin or any of those cards being able to stop Hodor from calling that disordered charge, you've got a chance to kind of go in there and neuter that unit. So they're there, but they exist as a hard counter to some of the other nasties that you can put on the table. So it's really tough for me to say which is the greater of the two evils, the Death Star or the counter to the Death Star.
Right, but what we're getting at is you got to have it, because if you come up against someone with a Death Star and you have no answer, then you're pretty much out of luck. Yeah. You
can run a list without Walder, but you're definitely exposing yourself to the potential of being across from a Death Star, and you just don't really have an answer for it. Particularly with Tyrion, when I went to Gen Con, I teleported that Mountains Men unit with Tywin's Mad Dog with all those attacks, sundering, vicious, critical blows, and Walder didn't exist at the time. So if my opponent didn't have Tywin like I did, then at some point, they were eating Gregor to the face, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do about it.
Right, and that's what I was going to mention is early in the game, I really loved the timing. The priority shifting is wonderful, but that exact moment when you do the thing you got to do, it was very crucial to victory or loss. And with something like Walder, it's just all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the negative experience comes. It's like, oh, I just can't have my awesome unit most of the game.
Yeah, and it's essentially 3 rounds are guaranteed. So you're going to be first player 3 rounds. So he doesn't have to do anything aside from go to the tactics board immediately, which is most often the first play anyway, is to jump on the board, grab a free attack, jump on the board, hand out a token and bolster your deck, or even jump on the board and heal. So he's kind of a no-brainer. I'm first player, I'm plopping Walder down, and now I'm going to neuter your best unit.
Yeah,
I'll go as far as to say that at least with Varys, you had the dice roll, that you could possibly fail.
Yes.
But now with Walder, it's like you're saying, Brett, it's going to happen. It's just you have to expect it.
Unless they're playing Lannisters and happen to have intrigue, or unless they are one of the folks that's willing to pay 5 points for Varys, you've got a 66% chance to stop Walder. But it almost seems counterintuitive to bring a 5-point NCU as a counter to another 5-point NCU. And I think generally across with the people that I've talked to in the discussions that I've gathered, almost everybody is going to choose Walder over Varys. Why would I bring 5 points, counter 5 points, when I can bring my own 5-point guy and do the same thing to you, and then we can just slap each other with pillows. So.
Yep. So coming full circle to the meta, you have to plan to see Varys competitively. This is what we're getting at. And many ways you can do that, as mentioned, but that is just something that you don't really want to see. All right, taking a step back from the meta, let's just go to our personal viewpoints on what we've experienced in the game as far as negative play experiences. Maybe something that you might never want to play with again. John, go ahead.
Okay, so the stone thrower, in my opinion, is a huge negative play experience, and I'm not so worried about it like on the competitive scene because it's just it has too much variable. It's too variable that I don't see it brought in a lot of competitive play.
Well, because you're going to see Walder, right?
Exactly, but even then, people are just. This is what I've noticed is that people just don't like it because it's so variable that it could do the minimal or it could wipe out nearly half the trade. But either way, that's a very negative play experience for both players because either it's one person will have a negative play experience. It will either be the guy shooting the stone thrower and hey, I missed and I just spent 10 points and this thing didn't do jack shit or did a few wounds and that's it, or the opposite where the other player has it and he's just getting mauled by this thing that has no range and no line of sight, or no range, and it can just lob and knock out 8-9 guys in their unit and no consequence. And so to me it's the definition. It's a negative play experience because it's going to be negative for one player at least. And like I said, what I've seen it used at is more of a more fun, more like, hey, that's cool. Let's have a catapult in the game, and then then people bring it, and then they're playing. Oh well, now I don't want to. Now this is doing nothing but just causing me to have heartache. So.
Anything to add to that, Brett?
I think he honestly hit the nail on the head with the fact that it's going to swing generally one way or the other. Either somebody's gonna just get obliterated by the stone thrower, or the owner of the stone thrower is going to be mad that he paid 10 points and he didn't really do much, and whatever he did do, they were able to just heal it up. So that's kind of the problem with the design of the stone thrower. The infinite range and only needing to have line of sight, ignoring intervening units for the purposes of that, you can deploy it in a way that you have pretty much covered the entire battlefield. The 12-inch restriction on it maybe isn't enough. It's really probably going to shine in Game of Thrones scenario where your opponent is presumably close to 40 inches away from you and they have to kind of make that long march across the table to get to your stone thrower. And as far as Walder being a counter to it, I think any person who's serious about bringing a stone thrower and making it a competitive thing is probably going to sell out to Yarwick NCU, so they effectively got rerolls the entire game, and they're probably going to have Varys, because as soon as Walder goes on the board, they are going to activate Varys to try to stop Walder, and they only have to do that 3 times, because when they're first player, their first move is going to be to activate Stone Thrower and shoot it before Walder even has the chance to influence it. So you can build a list that's optimal for the Stone Thrower, particularly with Knight conscripts becoming insignificant. It might actually be a little bit more competitive than what it was.
Oh, so good. Conscripts are so good.
Yeah, so if you line the board with conscripts, and you've got Othel as your commander, and then you've got Varys blocking out Walder Frey, and you're just shelling them with the Stone Thrower, and then you're hiding behind this wall of insignificant units, they might not have a choice but to come try to get through your conscripts to get to the Stone Thrower, all the while you're just kind of shelling them. And that type of artillery play was one of my favorite things about the game, was the fact that it didn't exist. Coming from a Warhammer Fantasy background, I hated gun lines. I hated it. And I think it was the same situation. The dwarf players loved it, and they would defend it to the death that they were able to bring 3 cannons and 2 stone throwers and a flame cannon and crossbows and guns, and you just had to march across there and hope that you had some of your army left by the time you got there. And the dwarf guys had a blast, and most everybody else hated it. And, all the polls I did for that game demonstrated that across the board, every faction outside of dwarves hated dwarves the most. It was their least favorite army to play. It was the least fun. And that's just what it was. And I don't want to see that kind of happen with this game, where Night's Watch gun lines just put everybody off, that they don't even want to play against Night's Watch because they just get shelled with artillery before they get across the board.
And definitely with the new changes coming out in 2 days, a gun line for Night's Watch is definitely going to be a thing. They've got the is it Ranger Hunters?
Yes,
that they're changing, and it's a good thing, because in it itself is a good thing, because I have 2 units of those myself, and I've never seen them on the board other than, hey, I just bought this unit, what can it do?
Yeah.
So
they're actually my favorite unit in the game. Even before the changes, they're just and that's like a thematic thing. The Ranger concept was just always really cool to me. They did underperform almost every game, but yeah, I'm glad to see a change to them. But it definitely, if you can soften a unit up and send the Rangers in as finishers, they're almost certainly going to be able to finish a unit off.
All right, those thoughts of the Stone Thrower are completely legitimate. I will just note that the way the Stone Thrower is set up, I think, is over a massive amount of games, you'll see balance. You have a low profile to miss, right? So the negative player experience on that side is low. And then once you do hit, you have a variable of the dice to do wounds. So yes, sometimes you do see many get taken out, sometimes you don't. But again, we're talking about averages here. So over the course of a long-term player experience, as if you think of it that way, then it'll all even out. So in the sense of that type of thinking, I'm saying that it's totally fine. But it's. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to add to it because I know I seemed really like I was piling down on the Stone Thrower. I think if you're speaking from a tournament point of view, it's going to be pretty difficult for a person using a Stone Thrower with the conscript build as I described, unless they manage to absolutely wipe the table. From a tournament standpoint, they're not going to score enough victory points and units killed to really be in the conversation for tiebreakers. So I think a unit like that, or a list like that conscript and Stone Thrower build is going for a 4-1 or a 3-0 type of win. They're not going to be able to really score too much higher than that unless they wipe the table. So there is that.
Okay. So catapults might seem like a fun, beginner, thematic type of unit, which is always nice, but I believe the intent is for all units to be playable in competitive situations. So we'll see if there's any changes soon with that, but I like it. I just don't like how the opponent across the table looks at it when I bring it. So moving on to that topic, let's go to beginners versus veterans in this game. Such an easy game to pick up and have fun with, and such a high skill cap. Do you guys think there's any negative play experiences going on with veterans being faced with beginners and Swiss random pairings round 1? I haven't really heard anything. I've hosted many, and the community is pretty awesome. But just throwing this out there as a side topic. What do you guys think?
I'll speak on that actually in a good way. After playing 40K and everything, this community is great. New players are welcomed in our community. I don't see any of that negative. Oh well, you don't have a beautifully painted painted army. Get out of here. And that's another thing I really like about the game. Is even though I paint up a lot of my stuff, there's none of that pressure for the new people to you have to paint this up because if you don't, then you can't play, or the way GW runs their stuff. So it's a very in talking about negative play experiences, this is actually very positive, a positive thing that CMON has done. So kudos to them on that.
All right. Brett, have you seen anybody come to a tournament round one and just get smashed and not want to play again? Or
I've seen them get smashed. I haven't seen them not want to play again. I think a lot of that is going to come from the veteran that's playing them. So I hate to say it, but I've kind of put spurs to some people at some tournaments before, some pretty deflating losses. But at the end of it, me personally, I was always sure to kind of take them off to the side and explain to them what I saw in their list, and maybe I would think about considering this, or when you made this move, perhaps that was when things started to unravel. I never just kind of kicked them in the teeth and just gave it to them all the way, and I have the tendency to kind of let off of the throttle and stop playing cards and things like that if I see that the game is under control. I don't feel the need to kill every model on the table just to make a statement, and I do take that opportunity to just have a little bit of a talk with them and apologize for the game not going so well, and I try to take that opportunity as a learning experience, and I think people are pretty receptive of that.
Yep, especially in tournaments where most people know that's what they're getting into when they.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think my personal view on that is that I learn way more from losing than I do from winning. If I win every single game, then it kind of creates this false narrative in my head that my list is flawless and I'm just not going to lose, and that's a bad thing. Honestly, I want to be challenged. I want to be beaten, and I do lose pretty regularly to the guys in my meta, and that's good because then I'm able to tweak my list and they kind of expose some of the flaws, and that's how I was able to land on the list that I took at Gen Con, was getting my teeth kicked in by the guys in Indy. So I think it's important, and I think the player, if they have the right attitude about it, you're going to take some losses and you're going to move on, and that's going to make you better. So I'm agreeing with John wholeheartedly about this community in particular, not just the anti-elitist thing from people who have their models painted. You don't really get any criticism for bringing unpainted models, but also just in general, the community is really warm and friendly. And that's been across the board at every event that I've gone to, local or otherwise. I haven't had a bad opponent that was just horrible. A rules lawyer to the point where they're taking away from the game, and I've just never had any situation like that. It's all been pretty fun and friendly with competitive overtones, but fun being the primary focus, fun and growing. And I don't know why that is, because in Games Workshop tournaments, I had horrible times playing sometimes. Just people nitpicking and win at all cost type players, and it just doesn't seem like this game has attracted those types of players. So it's definitely a positive for CMON and the game.
I completely agree. And as a side note, we can talk about the same situation, but as a casual game. And I guess I'm mentioning this to come full circle with this side topic. One of the greatest things you can do, even in a tournament to a certain extent, is to have a quick discussion before the game begins, because this type of MPE that we're talking about now is self-created, if you want to call it that. The players make it this way, so a quick talk with your opponent should resolve many issues. How do you re-roll dice? Which dice do you pick up? Declaring intent on trade positioning, line of sights, things like that. Talk about it, boom. This NPE is completely avoided. Alright, so that brings us to the future of this game. So let's talk about anything that we've seen that could be a negative play experience. John, take it away.
We've got a lot of the visions of the future, or visions, defining the future, and it looks very exciting. But some of the stuff that we were looking at was Melisandre and help me out here. Auriel, or what's the
Olenna?
Olenna, thank you.
Mm-hmm. She
we talked about that earlier, but it seems like that's going to be more of that. And then I think we had done the quick math, but it looks like Melisandre, she can do quite a bit of damage. I mean, you have to get things lined up, but it's definitely something that like without actually having to put it on the board, looks like it could be more of that same play style.
All right, Brett, what are your thoughts on upcoming NDEs?
I think I'm going to be the devil's advocate in this situation again. And it's not that there is validity to what you're saying, but I think the brakes should be kind of pumped on Melisandre now. I know that she, by the way of the wording on her card, she is immune to intrigue and subterfuge, and she is immune to Varys. However, having said that, Baratheons don't have access to something like a Cersei. They don't have access to a Hear Me Roar. If they bring Shira, they're pretty easily going to be able to get panic tokens. But with that aside, the best that they can do without a corpse pile intervention is a -3. And so she's pretty easily counterable with some of the stalwart attachments that exist. And the other fact of the matter is that she has to kill 3 of her own people to add that -3. And there's always the possibility that they're going to pass the panic test anyway. So at a -3, currently in the game, everything is capable of passing it. Raiders and Lannister crossbows and conscripts, those guys that have an 8, it's looking pretty grim for them. It's probably going to amount to 5 to 7 wounds. But having said that, Baratheons don't necessarily have the spare models just to throw out. So if you use Melisandre and you do the sacrifice every single time, you're killing 18 of your own guys to hopefully do some damage to your opponent. I think she's okay. She's also 5 points. I think she's okay. Is it Olenna? Is that the other one?
Olenna, yeah.
Olenna. She is a little bit more of a hard counter, but the other thing with that is one is tied to Renly and one is tied to Stannis, so you can't ever bring them both at the same time. And I actually kind of like what we've just talked about here. You've got Dario Naharis and his murder squad, his exploding time bomb of precision, and then you've got Walder Frey that shuts that down. Well, now you've got her that shuts Walder Frey down. So as these things layer and layer on top of each other, there's the counter to the counter, and now there's the counter to the counter's counter. So at some point, you're going to have to make some choices, and maybe at the end of it, some of that stuff just kind of gets pushed out of the game. So with the emergence of Walder Frey, I've noticed that some of the guys in my meta have reacted by, hey, and I'm one of them, I started bringing units that don't necessarily mind so much if Walder Frey shuts them down. 2 Veterans of the Watch in one of my lists, that's fine. You're going to shut off counterattacks. I can live without it. My attack profile is still 876. It's going to hit on 3s. I'm still going to be able to grind you down, and you can't touch my defensive save. So that's kind of my counter to Walder, and I think some of the other guys are doing that as well, just bringing some kind of vanilla units. And I've heard of Stark Sworn Sword kind of spam. You're going to take away Stark Fury. They'll be okay. So the less you invest into one big, massive unit that you're relying on to kind of win the game for you, the better off you are against those things. And we also have to keep in mind that at some point, I think he's been pushed to the back of everybody's mind because he's not allowed at official tournaments, but at some point the Mounted Behemoth is coming. And that becomes an 11 or 12 point unit depending on which cavalry unit you put him in. An 11 or 12 point unit with overrun and D3 wounds and a panic token that's just really capable of swinging a game. So I think when he was initially released, everybody was kind of flipping out like, oh, Tyrion with the Mounted Behemoth is unkillable. It's you can't do anything about it. They've got Varys, they've got Tyrion, and they've got the ability to activate Gregor 3 times in one round, and he's just going to steamroll through you. Well, the developers were probably sitting there laughing, reading the conversation because they knew about Walder Frey. and they knew about some of these other things that were coming later down the road, Alice with Thorn, the Free Folks Tactic deck, and they're like, yeah, this is a great unit, but we already know that there's ways to shut that down. So mostly I'm okay, and I have faith in the developers, and I think they're incredibly intelligent, and I think that they know things that we don't know. So I have faith that whatever they're releasing, there's going to be a way to counter that. And eventually, however broken a combo is, when you run into a hard counter and maybe you win all of your local games, but you go to Adepticon and you finally run into that hard counter and you just get shut down so hard and you lose going into top table, and now you've gone from potentially winning the event to down back to the middle of the pack. I think it will change a lot of people's perspective on what is untouchable and what's not. So I like the hard counters, and I like the counter to the counter and the counter to the counter's counter. So that's just me.
All right. Anything to add to that, John?
Well, I got two other topics I guess we didn't touch on, and sorry, we're kind of backtracking a little bit here. But two things that I was also looking at, and one of them, Toft Stage. I've talked with him a lot. He's a very good strategist. But one of the things he talks about, and I agree with, is that he talks about how killing all the different units that we have that go out there to kill different attachments is kind of a negative play experience, and I can definitely see that is out there where, hey, I just spent 3 points on the mountain or Great John or whomever.
Your commander.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, hey, I'm going to spend this really cool thing, and then I'm just going to go and kill him. And he's not wrong. That is a negative play experience, but I guess it would just depend on how. But personally, I don't see a whole lot of that play style, at least where I play, so it's not really an issue for me. But it definitely could be perceived as a negative play experience.
I think to respond to that, we've seen, generally speaking, a decrease in character attachment points, which relates to the fact that if you're going to bring one, you might want to bring more than one. Kind of thinking, if you just have your one star of the show, then he's going to be targeted, and you got to know that going in.
I'm actually glad you brought it up, because to be honest, at Adepticon, the Escalation League goes all the way up to 60 points.
Nice.
And so it's been, we know that the 60-point event is Fire and Blood. And me being, I'm a little bit gamey, guys. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit competitive. Not so competitive that I'm a jerk, but I am a little bit competitive. And it was very, very, very tempting, knowing that at the 60-point event is Fire and Blood, to throw in Jock and NCU. Because at 60 points, I can afford a 5-point NCU. And it's a high-risk, high-reward thing. If I go claim the swords round 1 and I kill your field commander with Jock and Hagar, that's a Fire and Blood scenario. I have made you do an uphill climb for the rest of the game. You don't have your field commander to add victory points. You are going to have a very, very hard time winning a game without the field commander. And to kind of make that exponentially worse, you don't have your field commander because I killed him with the tactics board, and you also don't have an NCU commander that you're running in place of that field commander, so you don't have that extra activation advantage. You're kind of just hurting. So
right.
I can see the merit to some of that being bad play experience, and if you know ahead of time that Fire and Blood is present, bringing Jock and Hagar, the attachment, or the NCU, is really not a bad play at all. It's actually pretty reasonable to do, because you can cripple an army so badly when they don't have a field commander.
Well, you actually just mentioned his counter, which is pretty brilliant, which is his attachment.
Yes, and I think, now I opted not to bring 5-point Jock and Hagar on my list. Spoilers for anybody who might be playing me at Adepticon, I will not have them. But I'm actually thinking about putting the Jock and Hagar attachment, the unnamed,
absolutely,
on my list, just in case somebody does think like I thought and they want to pop Jon Snow or whatever ground commander commander I might have. It could be Alistair or Denalnoy, but if they pop him, I'm at a disadvantage. So I might need to bring a second commander or Jock and Hagar so that I can create a clone of my commander as a counterplay. So
absolutely. And okay. All right, so speaking of 60-point matches, I'm a huge fan of larger games. And I know, Brett, you are too, so let's talk about your thoughts in regards to this topic on larger games.
So I think, kind of even backtracking a little bit into the hobby aspect, you've got some of the guys that like to paint their models. And we've got release after release after release after release coming. And so at some point, if you look on songoficeandfirebuilder.com and you start to scroll through your combat units, you're scrolling a lot more than you used to because more neutral units have come out and more house units have come out. I think at some point the scale of the game is maybe going to go to 50 points, possibly even 60, and that will be so that guys can put more of their models on the table. As your collection grows and as your painted models grow, you're going to want to put them on the field. And so I think at some point we're going to see a turn in the direction of larger scale games, and that's highly encouraged. But with that, when you're building a list at 50 points instead of 40 points, you can start to afford some of these toys that you wouldn't think about bringing at 40 points. And one of those toys that I want to kind of touch on for the negative play experience is Jockin, the Mysterious Prisoner. So at 2 points, he goes into an opponent's unit, an infantry unit, and if you kill that unit, and then you are able to assassinate either any attachment of theirs on the field or an NCU. And I think almost always, with the exception of maybe a Fire and Blood mission, you're going to kill an NCU, and you're going to remove whatever that NCU and their ability is from the game, but you're also going to kill an activation effectively. And that's kind of a 2 activation swing because you killed their unit, and now you killed an NCU. And I've been the victim of Mysterious Prisoner Jockin.
Oh, no.
And it traumatized me so badly that I almost never field Sworn Brothers anymore because they're easy to kill. So our store owner, Shane, actually a very savvy and smart player anyway, went ahead and brought Mysterious Prisoner Jockin and double great axes. And I tried to avoid it. And eventually, at the end of the game, he was able to kill the Sworn Brothers, and he was able to kill Amon, and it pretty well swung the game in his favor with John losing his maester. So it was bad business, but it does 2 things. Either you risk losing that unit and killing an NCU, or it's to the guy who brought Mysterious Prisoner's advantage because you take whatever unit he's in and you effectively take them out of the game yourself so that they're not at risk, and it kind of changes the way you play that unit. And presumably it's a glass cannon unit that he's going to go in, and that's probably the unit that you're relying on to do your heavy lifting. So your Pyromancers, your Sworn Brothers, your Upper Berserkers, your Great Axes, units like that, you can't put them in a bad spot because if something goes wrong, they're one-shotted, and now you lost an NCU too. So that's an interesting attachment. I'm maybe a little bit surprised that they chose to make it a 2-point attachment that's able to kill an NCU. It definitely blindsided me. I didn't think NCUs would be something that would be murdered, but here we are.
Yeah, I have not seen him played much. I think I tried him out for fun in a casual game and didn't get to pull it off. But you know, that like you said, it also depends on the list you're facing on how good he's going to be. All right. So another topic I'd like to touch on is the infamous counterplot. Circling back to what we're going to see in the future, we saw Courtney Penrose. His cards are leaked, and he also has the dreaded counterplot. And so in a general sense, denying card play and forcing discard of cards, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Just a quick take. Go ahead, Brett.
I think counterplot's a necessary evil, personally. With Varus effectively removed from being able to cancel zone replacement cards in the sense that they're no longer discarded unless the guy is crazy enough to play it knowing that it's going to be discarded. I like counterplot as a counter to sudden charge, fainting maneuver, orders to destroy. Without some kind of counter to those super powerful cards will really run rampant, and they can change the game late game when maybe they should lose, but they're going to win because they happen to draw that card at the right moment.
All right. Hey, John, how about you?
So my only thought on that really is that I wasn't super thrilled initially when I heard that Baratheons were getting counterplot, not because of the gameplay. Brett, you're 100% right that it's a good way to keep some health in the game. So I'm not 100% against it, but where I did feel like my initial thought why I didn't like it was I did like the idea of like, okay, Lannisters and Boltons, that fit their theme and it fit their play style, and I was like, okay, cool, we'll have that. So playing Lannisters, okay, you expect to play that type of game, and now that Baratheons are getting in it, I was like, okay, now it seems a little bit like, okay, now it's spreading.
Like everything added up, and you're just kind of like, there is these negative play experiences everywhere. What's going on here?
Yeah, that was just an initial thought. But like I said, it actually in play and purpose, we have to see how it goes. So I can't 100% say, but just my feeling was, I was like, oh god, here we go again.
Absolutely. And as we discussed throughout this chat, it's like Brett said, where there's counters to counters, and then counters to that counter, and then the original counter counters this also. So it's kind of a balancing act. And I think they're doing a wonderful job. Speaking of which, real quick, do you guys think you can bring a list to the table competitively with 0 of these things that we've discussed and compete and win a tournament? Brett, what do you think?
Absolutely. Depends on the house. I think Lannisters obviously innately have control just with their house deck. On the flip side of that, Night's Watch has very little control. I consciously choose not to play Alistair Thorne, who brings some of that control. I play with absolutely 0 control. I have nothing. I have no counterplays. I have no shutdown. I don't bring Walder Frey. I don't play into any of that.
And this is a list that I think you've won with recently?
Yeah, I've won both Adepticon primers with no control. One time, I have to recant that. The very first primer I won, I did have Varys. This most recent one that I won, which was kind of a Midwest clash, we had several states come. I did that with no control. It was a Jon Snow list with some veterans of the Watch and some Ranger trackers and some flayed men and no NCUs with any shutdown ability or control ability. No Khorne half hand, no Walder Frey. It was just the very basic Bowen Marsh at 4 points and Aemon at 4 points, and it worked out just fine for me having no control.
All right, John, what's your experience and thoughts on that? I know that Brett's already answered it from firsthand experience, but what are your thoughts?
So just my thoughts is, I think he's correct. You can definitely play list without control, and it doesn't have to be there. Actually, I listened just the other day to, I think, Yannick Burr's podcast, and you were on it, Brett.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you were saying, and this is my thoughts, is that Starks are very popular right now. We see them in the majority of competitive lists out there. And my feeling is that they're popular because you don't have all that shenanigans. That they're very straightforward. Hey, this is you just go out and you kill, and that's their that's what they do. And I'd be curious to see what in those lists, how much control or non-control is in there. But it's just one of the things where you can definitely play lists, and Starks inherently are not very controlling. You can bring control lists, but they're not inherently very controlling. And so, yeah, definitely, it's possible. But it's just a matter of also what your meta runs.
I would add for sure as a shout out and kind of some props to the game developers.
Absolutely.
Michael and Fabio, they do listen. And if you come from other gaming systems, I think you've learned that they're going to run with what they're going to run, and they might give you a condescending remark to tell you that you need to adjust your play style. But I think that they lurk on the forums a lot more than you think, and they listen a lot more than you think, and they've demonstrated that by going back over their design with no ego and saying, hey, we did this, we released it, we thought it was balanced, we're finding out it's not, so we're going to go back and we're going to change it. And I think that's a vote of confidence for the game moving forward, that if something comes out and it's so horribly broken that it's dominating metas and it's dominating tournaments, they are going to fix it. They absolutely zapped the Sworn Brothers spam, and some people were happy, some people were not, but they did it, and I think it's made the game better. So it's encouraging to know that they listen and that they care enough to go back and fix that.
All right, John, your final thoughts here?
Yeah, again, this was a lot of negative talk about NPE, but overall, yeah, the game is phenomenal, and I think it is in a general good state, and I enjoy the game, and I'm trying to grow the community where I am. I know, Carl, you're in the same where you're at, and it's a great, I love getting this game out there. So yeah, it's definitely in a good position, and it's just us really. I feel like this is just us talking and sharing our feelings. But in no way is this meant to say that we don't love this game. So
I 100% agree. I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to chat about it. It's a very interesting topic, and my pursuit of this topic was to kind of flip it upside down and just having like an awareness of what the topic is, to define it, to point the things out, and then to be prepared for it will kind of mature everyone's thought process with NPEs to the point where it won't affect people so much, because now everyone can expect what to expect, and they know that they can bring lists without it and still have a blast and still win tournaments. So at the end of the day, thanks again, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching, and please take the time to like and subscribe. We also have a request from John and Brett. If you folks could share your personal opinion on negative play experiences, and specifically demonstrating to new players, how do you go about setting up and creating a positive, fun experience while these are in the game? Do you think negative play experiences in this game are even really there? Are they just part of the strategy? Are they part of what you need to think about to play? Or is it an issue? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much.